I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a great panel lined up for you today. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. Let's go ahead and get started with Collin.
Hi, I'm Collin. I am teacher based in DC, advocate, activist, and also co-host of INN News with my co-host Reef Brainland on the Indie News Network.
Awesome. Imani.
Hey everybody, my name is Imani Oakley. I am an organizer in New Jersey and also a former congressional candidate right here in New Jersey.
Case.
Hi, my name is Case, otherwise known as Case Study QB on Twitter. I clip news that progressives can use to try to curate and to try to get clips that we can all use and benefit from. I'm the unofficial producer for all the online independent left.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome to the student debt panel. Now, all of us have something in common. All of us have had to deal with student loans in some way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of us were somewhat excited when we found out that there was going to be some form of student debt cancellation. But at the same time, I think we wanted all of it to be canceled. But that being said, some of us did have concerns and we did wonder if there was going to be any type of issues with the way that Biden went about trying to cancel student loan debt. So before we get into our own personal experiences with student debt and student loans in general, I actually want to share this video here from Imani.
Eric Chronicles.
From Imani, because Imani posted this video and I think everybody needs to see this because the student debt cancellation may not really be exactly what you think. So let's go ahead and take a listen here.
According to establishment dem math, Biden's student loan forgiveness is the greatest thing on the planet. And I have my doubts. So to fix this problem, I gave a nice call to the people that service our student loans. Mohila. Let's see how that went.
Thank you for calling Mohila. My name's
Yeah, so I had a question. Apparently I was one of the people who was approved for the $20K loan forgiveness from Biden, but I know that that's, still being litigated in court. But I had a question about, if the court approves it and I do get that $20K forgiven, I would still have loans left over. So my question would be, what would be the percentage of interest on those loans that are left over?
Well, I will tell you that the discharge would go directly to interest. So if you get the full $20,000, it would only reduce your interest by $20,000, which means that your principal balance is the same.
Aha! As I suspected, this policy is nothing to write home about. Let me break down why. First, let's start with defining what interest is for those who are watching this video and don't know. Interest is the price you pay for borrowing money from a lender. That means when you pay back your loan, you're paying back the money borrowed plus an extra lump sum, which is known as the interest. So Biden's one-time forgiveness plan is not going towards that original sum that you borrowed. It's going towards that extra payment used to pay corporation. To put it another way, let's say you got $10,000 forgiven under Biden's plan. Then you have a $10,000 loan plus $10,000 of interest on that loan. Under Biden's plan, only that $10,000 worth of interest is going to be gone. You still owe $10,000, buddy. And guess what? Interest will just continue to accrue on that amount that you still owe. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, Imani, why are you being so negative? This helps some people. Well, excuse the hell out of me, because I didn't know that we could go to work and half-ass our jobs. Because that's certainly what Biden is doing, given the fact that he has the power to forgive it all, and he's just using that power to pay corporations. And I get it, you just wanted some good news. Well, listen, you are welcome to lie to yourself all you want. It is your world, you feel me? But that doesn't mean I have to live in it with you. I'm always up to something, never sitting on.
Okay. So Imani, I'm going to start with you because I think when you posted this video, I don't think a lot of people realized this, that the money was going to go to the interest first.
Mm-hmm. They sure didn't. And it's funny because when Biden first released the info about the 20K and 10K forgiveness, like, because I've dealt with policy, like literally my entire career, I was like, nah, man, like y'all are not getting what you think you're getting. And a whole bunch of people tried to ratio me online. I'm talking not only the usual suspects like K-Hive and all those folks, but also people on the left who, for whatever reason, whatever their careers, wherever they think their careers will go because they are on the side of Biden, they yelled at me too. And I'm like, no, guys, like just look at the policy. Look closely at the policy. This is really just like, a lot of smoke and mirrors. You guys are really not getting anything out of this. Nowhere near what was even promised on Biden's campaign, let alone what Bernie Sanders was pushing and what the left generally pushes as far as full forgiveness and free college. And so basically, I got a little bit tired of people trying to insult my intelligence, saying this is such the greatest thing in the world, that I went out and made that video so I could prove that it in fact was not. And I think I did a great job of proving that because it's been quiet ever since. So, that's what made me really get out there and do that video. I have a bunch of student loans, but I think the bigger point, like beyond what I have, is the fact that Biden promised something. He promised something on the campaign that he did not deliver. And to me, the most horrendous thing that he promised and didn't deliver was he promised to forgive HBCU loans for everybody making under 150K. And that was his way of bringing more Black voters onto his campaign. And what happened? Black voters delivered for him, and he did not deliver back on that promise. And I think it is just an incredible insult to my intelligence and to other Black voters' intelligence to try and tell us that we're getting what we expected from him, and we absolutely are not.
Well said. How many of you on the panel have some type of grad school degree or post-undergrad? Okay. Yeah. So this is, I'll start with myself. Like, most of my student loan debt comes from grad school, not from undergrad. But when I tell people that, they'll say, well, you shouldn't have gone to grad school. Not realizing that depending on your career path, in order for you to move up, you have to go to grad school. A lot of these positions, especially in higher education, they require you to have a master's degree. So at some point, you're going to have to do that. Even for some teachers, at least here in Boston, they want the teachers to have a master's degree. So I think that's important for people to understand. Case, I want to start with you. Tell us about your student debt journey.
Yeah, so the very reason why my dad was trying to encourage me to go to grad school, and I was like, Dad, I got too much debt. I'm not even thinking about grad school. I got to get a job. So my student loan journey, after I graduated from college, it took a little while for me to even find a good job in my field. And luckily they give you a deferment period, or a period of time where you don't have to pay back just yet. But after about a year, you have to start paying back. But luckily I was able to find a decent job in my field, maybe 2 years after college. And one of the advice that my dad said was pay off your student loan debt as soon as possible. And I'll reveal I had about 20K. And I had the opportunity to listen to my dad. So anybody out there who might be just coming out, listen to my father and try to pay off as much debt as you can. Because I probably within a year, and it was right before, it was around 2007, 2008, because my particular job was tied straight directly to the stock market. And when I literally saw a company that was vibrant, very, a lot of people was coming through there, and slowly, gradually, it wasn't as vibrant. It wasn't as many people. It was a desert by the end, and we did get laid off. So I had a great chance to within that first year to really do some damage. I threw like 1G on there and I was like, okay, I'm good. And I'll just pay the minimum, not really thinking ahead to the point where I got laid off, and then I got another job, but I quickly got married, and that was a lot. Paying for the wedding was a big expense. And then once you get married, you're looking to rent. Before, when I was in that original job, I was at home with my parents, so I didn't have to pay rent. But as soon as I got married, I'm in New Jersey. We're paying rent. Then the kids come, so it very quickly the piles start piling up, and I got away from having that expendable income to really pay off my debt to the point where I am today, where I still have a lot of student loan debt. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that run into that situation. That's actually why at least some of the Gen Z students are choosing not to even get married, like not have families, because they have so much student loan debt. Collin, what about your student debt journey?
Kind of similar to Case. I had the opportunity to go, because I grew up in Jersey, had the opportunity to go to Rutgers. I would have been able to probably go for very little, if not full ride. And just due to home situations, it really wasn't a safe environment for me. So I elected to go to college out of state and pay. And obviously doing that, I had student loan debt out of college. Fortunately, at the time, I didn't have much relatively. I had owed about $20K, but as a teacher, as you said, Sabby, in order for you to get a teaching job, you need a master's degree. Now, at the time when I graduated college, which was in the early 2000s, it wasn't necessarily the case, but a lot of the well-paying districts at that point were just beginning to say you need to have a master's in order to teach in our district. At the time, I didn't know if I wanted to stay in teaching, so I ended up taking jobs in daycares, which typically make way less money. Mm-hmm. And so basically for a decade, I was kind of doing whatever I could to get a job. And in the middle of that, I went back to grad school, but I didn't finish that degree. So that was another $20K that I had to pay off. Keep in mind, didn't finish that degree. And then eventually I went and got my master's again. That time I finished. Fortunately, I didn't have to pay as much because I was doing a teacher residency. And then by that point, I was making the salary that kind of justified, being able to pay it off in a way somewhat aggressively, but it took me over a decade to get to that point. So after all is said and done, I had at the maximum $75,000 that I had to pay off. So, which includes the grad school program that I didn't finish, yep, mind you. So, but yeah, I'm now making the salary where I'm able to pay it off. And now, given that there's no interest due to the pandemic, paying it off a little bit more aggressively. But it took me over a decade to even get to the point where I was able to get paid a decent salary in teaching that I'll be able to pay more than the minimum payment. And as of now, I have to pay like about, I think at minimum $500 a month now. But I was paying as much as close to $1,000 a month minimum towards paying off my student loans.
Amani, what about your student debt journey?
Yeah, so I have 3 degrees. I have an undergraduate degree, I have a master's degree, and I have a JD. I'm an attorney by trade. So I got a lot of student debt. And it's interesting because, becoming a lawyer, I have to get all those degrees. Like I have to go to school. It's not like I can, go to undergrad and then like do an apprenticeship and then like become a lawyer and not have debt. Like I have to go through that much school. And otherwise, if I didn't take on that debt, there would be no way that I could go to college at all. Like my family just couldn't afford it. My mom took on loans, whatever the parent loan is, for 1 year of my college, and the rest I had to do. And otherwise, I would not have been able to go to college. And it's interesting because often, again, this is what makes me so angry about the insidiousness of Biden using Black people for votes, but then not delivering on this issue, is that so many people that look like me, and frankly, everybody on this panel, are in a similar position where they could not afford college at all if it was not for the fact that they could take out loans. But then once they take out those loans, they try to better their lives and do all the respectability things that people tell us all the time growing up. You can't, inhale and exhale and turn left or right without somebody telling you, get an education, get a good job, take care of your family, all of that. We go and do that, we are essentially punished for it. And so, I have $500K actually in student loans because of undergrad. I went to Howard undergrad, then I went to NYU, which NYU was really that's the one that really kicked me for real, for my master's degree, and then my JD back at Howard. And throughout that time, I deferred my loans and then only started paying once I got out and got a job. And I was on the student loan, the public service loan repayment plan, because I was working for the U.S. Senate when I first got out. And then I worked for the New Jersey legislature. So both public jobs. But then, once I decided to switch that up, I had to then pay, I couldn't be on that plan anymore. So I still had wage adjusted as well throughout that time and now, but even with wage adjusted now, I still have to pay around $550K a month. And I didn't show that entire Mohila convo because I had to cut it for social media. Like I had 2 minutes and 20 seconds, but that conversation was about 15 minutes long. And during that conversation, poor Mohila guy, he was actually a super nice guy. I know he just has a job, but he was like, yeah, if I do this, this, and this for you, you can pay off your loans in 14 years. And I laughed when I was on the phone with him. And I was like, wow, that's swell, isn't it? And like, he even had to laugh on the other side because it's like, that's just so ridiculous for somebody trying to get an education so they can actually be productive in society. It makes no sense whatsoever. So, I was on that, the wage adjusted as well as the public service. Now I'm just on wage adjusted. And even with that, once these loans come back, I'll have to pay $550 a month for getting an education because there was no way that I would have been able to go to college at all if it was not for these loans.
Yeah, I think that's what people need to understand. Not everyone comes from a family that can pay for, even undergrad or even community college. Like for some people, like that is your only way to attend college. One of the things that was interesting to me, so for me, I graduated during that time. It was right into the 2008 housing crisis. Horrible time to start a career. I actually couldn't find a job within my field for at least like the first 3 years because of everything that was happening with the housing crisis. There were less companies that were hiring people. So I actually ended up working retail and waitressing at the same time. So I had 2 jobs. My loans were deferred because of that, because I didn't make enough to pay those loans at that point in time. But when I finally did get into my field, then I realized I was underpaid for what I should have been paid, like for higher education. And then from there, it was like, if you wanted to move up, you have to go back to school. You have to go to grad school to get a master's degree in order to become like even academic advisor, you guys, like they require you to have a master's degree. So then I had to go back to school. And that's how I ended up with more student loan debt. And that's actually where the bulk of my student loan debt actually comes from. But I never really got to the point, at least in my career, where I was able to just knock those student loans out. And then, of course, the interest continued to pile up. So I still owe approximately like $70,000 in student loan debt. And most of that does come from grad school. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I don't know what to tell people except for the fact that I was advising students just over a year ago at BU, and some of those students were graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt just for undergrad. And when they would come to me and ask me like if they should go to grad school, I just tell them don't. I said, if you can avoid it, just go into industry and avoid going to grad school if you can avoid it. But not everyone can, depending on your career path. But I can tell you guys, even right now, those students are graduating with mounds and mounds of student loan debt. they're getting the jobs, like they're getting jobs like right here in Boston, but some of these employers are paying these kids like $50,000 a year, and they're graduating with like $80,000, $90,000 of student loan debt. So I'm like, these kids are going to be working forever to pay off the student loans. And then you have to worry about the high cost of rent as well. Where Pilgrim has a question here, I think this is for you, Collin. How long has the need for a master's degree as a teacher been the policy? Has it been in the past decade or so or longer? Good question.
I answered him in the chat, but I graduated college in 2003. Now, when I was in college, I was told by my mentors, certain districts, and these were usually the more affluent ones, would not allow you to work. They wouldn't even look at you unless you had your master's degree. So that was in the early 2000s. So I think definitely by the time I graduated college, so definitely within the 2000s, that became, at least in Massachusetts, because that's where I graduated from at the time, it became more standard that they would, well, it was the preference, but then it basically became like, you need to have a master's. So definitely within the last, I'll say 20 years, it's become more standard for teachers to have a master's degree in order for you at least to be a lead teacher, meaning not a paraprofessional or an assistant, but in order to lead your own classroom within the last 20 years. And then, even if you have a bachelor's degree, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you that you'll be able to get a teaching position. More often than not, they will also ask you, oh, you need experience too. So often that you may have to end up at college ending up maybe taking an assistant role, which is kind of similar to what happened to me, in order to get the experience. So then, and then going into grad school for a year or two to get more debt in order for you to get that teaching job. So it's kind of backwards in a way that they kind of set it up in that way to ensure that like these students are going into debt. And I know plenty of colleagues, like similar to Amani, and keep in mind these are teachers. Like I have a close friend who has about 100K in debt still, is a teacher, but has 2 kids, just divorced. And she just told me like a few months ago, she was like, I'm never going to be able to buy a house for my family. Because I am indebted to this debt. And so, and that kind of leads into the idea of like, why go into the teaching profession when you're not necessarily the salary to justify the idea of you being in this kind of debt. And I think especially Black people in general, what I find is that we have a lot more debt, I would argue, compared to like our white counterparts as well. Like I know plenty of Black people like around me who I know that are still in 6 digits worth of debt. Versus like white counterparts might have a little less. But yeah, I think definitely within the last 2 decades, it's become more standard in the teaching field that you need a master's.
Yes. Yeah, that's I know in Boston it's required. So it's like they will tell you don't even think about trying to get a teaching job here if you don't have a master's degree. And then after that, they want you to have other certifications as well, such as like special education, English language learner,
which you have to pay for out of pocket.
That's right. You have to pay for those. You have to pay for all those by yourself, and those are not cheap certifications. Amani, I want to go to you. What was it like for you when you were finished law school and you were starting to enter the workforce?
Yeah. So again, talking about establishment Dems and how they just do not live up to all the things they espouse verbally. So like I said, fresh out of law school. So I went straight from law school, took the bar, and then went to work for the United States Senate. So fresh out the gate, I was working in the United States Senate for Democrats, right? I worked for Senator Cory Booker. And in the Hill, and this goes for Booker's office too, as much as he pretends to be a progressive, this goes for his office too. On the Hill, there is a culture of, unless your mommy or daddy is somebody who's real, real important, or a real big donor, you are going to start at the very bottom. They don't care how much education you have. And that's why we've seen these things like pop up, like I think it was like Dear White Staffers or something like that, where all the staffers are coming out talking about like, actually, I'm starving. Actually, this member is super racist. Actually, like, you know, my salary for all that I do and the hours that I work is nowhere near up to par. That's why stuff like that actually happened, because it didn't matter how much degrees I had. It didn't matter that I had all the time I was going through education. I made every single point, every single semester to have at least one internship that dealt with politics or government. So I worked for the U.S. State Department. I worked on the Hill a few times. Worked in the United States Senate. All of that just so I could graduate, thinking like, okay, I'll have all this on my resume when I graduate, and it'll at least give me some bump, so I don't have to start at the very bottom. Nope, had to start at the very bottom, and my pay was actually $48K in New Jersey. So like barely scraping by. And then if you think about having to pay student loans, that has to go to that. So, it's in thinking in looking at all the ways that it pisses me off that Biden is not delivering on this. It's a bigger picture. Like, I think people are just like, because they're so focused on themselves, they project that onto me. And it's like, oh, you got so much student loans, that's why you're mad. No, I'm mad because it's a bigger issue with establishment Dems not, walking the walk. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. From every single aspect of this, I've seen it, from coming out of school and being just as qualified, if not more qualified, than some of the senior people in Booker's office, but still having to be paid at the bottom of folks in that office. And then having to, all my life being told, go to school, just to do that and do very well at going to school. I always had good grades, always graduated honors. I became an attorney. And just for then more establishment Dems to look me dead in my eye and say, yeah, well, who cares? Well, what was the point then? What was the point of all of that talk that y'all did? Deliver. It's time to deliver.
Yeah, 100% agree. Case, your situation is a little bit different because you did get married, you started a family. How would you say it is for you now in reference to paying off your student loans? If you had to give a time period or ballpark time period, how long do you think it would take you?
I don't know, and luckily, or unluckily with the COVID issue, we haven't been paying back. But if to get back into it, I might have to pay like $300 a month, and I'll have to contact them, and I'm not exactly sure how many years it'll take. I was truly hoping on someone coming through with their promise. It was Bernie who would have, I believe, extinguished all debt. Elizabeth Warren was at least 50,000, but now I see that with people on this panel having six figures, like that's not even enough.
No.
So, but I was hoping, even with Biden saying 10,000, I was like, okay. And I got the initial email before people started suing and preventing it. I was like, okay, at least 10,000, I could work with. But then I see Amani's video, and I'm like, this is just a big gaslight like going on with this scenario, and all they want is like, give me your vote, come vote for me one more time, and we'll give you whatever. They just tell you whatever you want to hear so that they can so that you could give them your vote. And I'm just curious, if you don't mind me asking, I know for me personally, if anyone asks me, hey, was it valuable to go to college, at least for the first 4 years, I can't speak for grad, I thought it was a very valuable part of my life because it was the first time I was away from home. I was on my own. I didn't have mom or dad to wake you up at 8 a.m. Oh, time to get up for school. I had to motivate myself. I had to motivate myself with school. I didn't have a lot of money, so there's ways I had to hustle to try to find out how to eat, in my second and third, fourth years, and get a job while still in college. So it was a very big character building development years for me. So I found value more than even on the academic side, more about personal self learning. But I'm curious if you feel the same way about your 4 years of college, and then also about graduate school. Like, did you have the same self-learning, or at that point, it was business? And then do you think that you use that knowledge from graduate school? Do you use that in the real world today?
Collin, do you want to go first? I talked a lot.
Sure. As far as me for undergrad, I agree with you. It was definitely like like I was looking to grow in my independence and, be away from home and kind of learn how to do things for myself. So I definitely found value in that, but I struggled in terms of, because I didn't have the support of my family to really help me or support me through that. So having to kind of go through it on your own, it was a lot for me to deal with. Fortunately, I was able to graduate on time, but I felt like if I had better support systems, I think I would have appreciated my experiences when I was in college a little bit more. I felt for me, grad school the second time was a lot more beneficial because by then I knew what I wanted to do, and I found a program that was catered to my needs. And it also helped that I had the experience in my field by that point. So it basically in a lot of ways felt like kind of like an internship in a sense. So I really enjoyed the teaching residency that I did for grad school. Shout out to Leslie University. But so I think for me, once I got out in the field and started teaching and kind of doing different things within education and kind of learned what I liked and what I didn't like. By the time I got into grad school for the second time, I was very sure and very set on what I wanted to do. Like the decade prior to that, I was still kind of like trying to figure things out, to the point even I wasn't sure if I even wanted to remain in teaching, just due to the idea of, low pay and then low hours, and then not necessarily feeling like I was getting anything worth the degrees that I am still paying so much money for. So I think for me, by grad school, I felt more secure and a lot more centered, that I had a lot better experience there. But to get to that point was rough.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Collin on this as well, because I was the first person in my family to go to a 4-year university. So my parents, there was just some things they didn't understand. So like, for example, they knew that I had financial aid and they helped as much as they could. But at the same time, like, there were times I did have to call home and I did have to ask for money for other expenses to go along with my classes. Like, not just my books. I paid for my books because I had a part-time job when I was in college. But there were other things, like it was required that we took a speech class. Like everybody, this was something that one of those core requirements everyone had to take. Well, what you didn't find out until you got into the class is that you actually had to wear a suit. So like I didn't have a suit, and suits are expensive. So like I remember I had to call home and ask my parents for money so I can get a suit. And then there's other social things that went along with some of the courses that, again, you didn't know about beforehand, but it was kind of like if you didn't go, then you weren't networking. Those types of things that are really important. And it's interesting because I've talked to friends of mine that have even attended Harvard. They said this exact same thing, that just because you went to Harvard, like that's not enough. Like they still had to network while they were there to get opportunities later on. So it was really difficult, because academically it wasn't, but it was really difficult financially, because in their eyes, they didn't understand why I needed more money when financial aid covered a certain portion and they covered a certain portion, because they didn't have that same experience. But by the time I got to grad school, I did feel more prepared. Plus, I had already worked a couple of years beforehand, and I went to grad school part-time and I was working part-time. So I did feel more prepared by that point. Whether or not it was worth it, I don't know. Like, it's really interesting because I don't work in higher ed anymore. I left higher ed like last year, but I do think it was valuable. There were a lot of things that I learned about myself, not just academically, but having that college experience. Where would I do things differently? If I could do it all over again, I would have actually gone to school abroad in a country where I could go to school for free. Like, that's what I would have done. Like, I would have gone to Germany or any other country where I didn't have to pay like full tuition, or I would have gone to community college for the first 2 years and then transferred to a 4-year institution. So if I could do things differently, I would have done them differently looking back on it.
Yeah.
What about you, Money? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things in addition to that, because I have UK citizenship, and that was something briefly I considered in high school to go back to London, and I probably should have, in retrospect, instead of studying here. But I know a couple of people are asking, well, why, as a teacher, can you have just gone to community college? I would argue no, in a sense, only because, and I've been on the administrative end, and Sabby, I know you're probably aware of this too. I've known administrators in education, like in schools, who will look and see at your resume where you went to school. And if you do not have the desired top schools, like, they will throw your resume in the trash, or they will not even call you. So, so it also matters in the type of school that you go to as well, depending on the field. That is also significant that no one really talks about. And I've seen that happen behind the scenes where I've known principals who, they may have great applicants, but they may have gone to a community college and they're like, nah, not even going to look at this person. So there is that bias there in terms of which school you go to also matters. So I think there's also kind of innate pressure in, it's not going to college, it's the right college. And especially if it's a name brand college, that also makes a difference, especially if you are a student of color. So that's why I think for many of us, it's the idea of like, we should go to Harvard, we should go to these Ivy Leagues, or like these top programs, to these top colleges, because those also help in terms of you getting a job in those fields, in especially more competitive fields, if you've gone to the schools that they're looking at. So I just wanted to say that because I feel that not many people necessarily talk about that, but having seen that, I think that's also kind of something that should be highlighted. Is there is a bias for certain employers that they're looking for people to come from certain colleges in order for them to even hire you.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because like I do know people that went to Harvard and they're struggling financially because they had to take out so many like student loans. Like they have good jobs, but they're still like, I don't know if they'll ever, like they've said this before, they don't know if they'll ever be able to pay off their student loans. So it's kind of like, it's a trade-off, right? It's like you get that degree from a name brand school, but now you have like mounds of debt. So it's like, do you trade off the debt and go to a school that may not be as reputable, or do you continue to go to the name brand school and just deal with the debt like afterwards? Of course, this isn't an issue for legacy kids, and this isn't an issue for those who have parents that have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Amani, what about you? Do you think it was worth it in the end?
Yeah. So two things. I just want to touch on what Collin just said. 100%, Collin, I feel you. That was actually, so my entire strategy of going to NYU after going to Howard was so that I could have what's considered like one of the top HBCUs on my resume, right, as well as one of the top PWI/universities in the country. Just so when people looked at my resume, they would see those and bump me to the top. Like that was actually my very explicit strategy in doing that. I was even like trying to be like fake about it. Like that was my explicit strategy. And so that's 100% right. But I do want, whoever asked that question and other folks just to like take a step back sometimes. And because the thing is, it's easy for us to get gaslit into thinking that, well, if you're in this circumstance, like you can only have these options. But that's not what's promised to us. What is told to us is that there is an American dream and that anybody can achieve it. So why should I have to go to a college that I don't want to go to simply because it's more affordable? I've been told my entire life this thing called the American dream exists, that all people can achieve. So what does it matter what circumstances I'm born into? I should be able to choose whatever college I want. Freedom of choice. We love choice here in America, right? That's why we don't like communism, because we like to have choice. So why should I have to choose a place I don't want to go or that won't be beneficial to me simply because I'm born into certain circumstances? And I think we have to I would challenge folks or encourage folks to think about this from a bigger picture standpoint. So there's my rant there. But I would actually say that I think my education was incredibly valuable. From, I think, all of the places that I went. I really, really feel good about the education and the experiences I got, whether that was, the social experiences. If anybody has ever interacted with Howard University from a social standpoint on the college level, you already know what I'm talking about. That was a great experience. So socially, it was great. I also think the academics are great, because one of the things that, folks tend to say is, oh, well, why go to college where I could just go to the library, go to the bookstore and learn that same stuff? Sure, but the learning curve is a lot more steep, because in college, you have access to some of the top minds in the world on certain subjects, and you can just go and have a conversation with them. And they'll critique your work. They'll help you read other books and find other sources, right? It's just a faster way to kind of get that information. So I think the education was great. And I also think the way in which I've been trained, or rather I have a friend that says good education isn't about training people to think, it's about allowing them to think. And I think that, my education did allow me to think in a certain way that allows me to now do things like that video, or recognize BS when it's right in front of my face by establishment Dems. So I think it was incredibly valuable. I think the only downside is that we live in a country that decided to up in one day not value education, because Ronald Reagan essentially wanted to hurt the left and people of color. So he made this up, because prior to Ronald Reagan, college was very, very cheap in the U.S.
Yeah.
I have a mentor actually who went to college early 80s, late 70s. He went to Howard undergrad, and it cost him $1,000 per semester. Super cheap. Super cheap. And then he became an orthodontist, so of course he was able to pay that off like that. So it's not even something that's been around since time immemorial. It just came around because Ronald Reagan up and decided it one day, which means we can just up and decide to get rid of it. So yeah, I think my education was extremely valuable. The only unfortunate part is the cost.
Yeah.
These are all good points. I often wonder too, if you are able to get into those schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, if you got in, and especially if you do need some form of financial aid, the way I kind of saw it is well, look, if they were smart enough to get into those schools, then I think those schools should give them a full academic scholarship. That's how I've always felt. If we look at Massachusetts, like MIT and Harvard, they have the largest endowments of all the colleges in Massachusetts, right? So MIT is really good about giving out some type of fellowship, assistantships. They give as much as they can, sometimes more than Harvard, depending on the area that you go into. But when I look at schools like Princeton and Yale and Stanford, why aren't they giving those kids a full academic ride? Because I feel again, same thing with NYU. If you can get into those schools, shouldn't they pay for your academic experience there, and at least the tuition in some way, shape, or form?
I didn't poverty cosplay enough. So one of the things that is also really nasty about the whole college affordability and getting scholarships and stuff like that is, so I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, which is considered a rich town, but there is a very distinct, mostly working class Black community here. Mm-hmm. But when I put on, any type of financial aid, anything, it just says that I'm from Montclair. So that'll be calculated as oh, you basically live in a mansion, don't you? Definitely not. And then on top of that, owning a house, right, also goes on top of it. They take off points, or rather put you farther down the list for receiving aid if your parents own a house, which on the front of it, on the face of it, makes sense. But then when you take into account all of the bad loans that Black folks were getting, my family got that. So we owned a house, but we actually almost lost our house to foreclosure. And so we certainly were not in a position as, I would say, my white friend counterparts who did have mansions in Montclair and who didn't, whose parents, houses weren't under threat of foreclosure, and whose parents basically owned the house, sometimes for generations. But those boxes that you tick, they're not very nuanced. And so a lot of times you will kind of just be booted out of any aid you could possibly get because of those check boxes.
That's a good point. Newton, Massachusetts is probably one of the wealthiest towns here in Massachusetts, and it's right outside of Boston. And the houses there are like $1 million homes. So like the people who live there, these are doctors, lawyers, very wealthy lawyers. And of course, some of the professors, like some of the MIT professors, they live like in Newton, Massachusetts. But the problem that you run into is that Newton, Massachusetts also has apartments. So not every kid that went to Newton South High School is coming from a wealthy family. Some of them, some of those kids live in an apartment with their family in Newton. And so some of these schools like Harvard may see that zip code and assume, oh, they have the money to come here. And that can be a dangerous thing as well. So zip codes are very important, I think. And to that point, there are some schools like Harvard that they seek out certain zip codes. So you can be a straight A student at your high school, but if your zip code is not a favorable zip code for where they tend to recruit Harvard students from, Boston University does this too, by the way, then you may not even be selected just because of where you live. They look at it as though, yes, they're a straight A student, but they're a straight A student for that zip code, and they wouldn't be able to compete with the other students that are coming to Harvard, and they're going to struggle when they get here. And this is something I used to go back and forth with on the admissions committee when I worked at MIT. We used to talk about this all the time, how they didn't want to take kids from certain zip codes and certain undergraduate schools for the PhD programs, because they said that they'll get here and they'll struggle, and then it'll be a loss, cause for them. And so I think that there is some judgment that is made as well about some of these, some of the students that are trying to come to these schools. I want to shout out what Mr. O said. Thank you so much for the super chat. My academic experience is the same as the lady. I have my BS, MS, and PhD with 5 internships, but had full scholarships, $500K value, bought home 3 years after graduation equals the American dream. Thank you so much for that, Mr. O. So, Case, when you're thinking about your kids, now I know they're young now, but eventually, they're going to be at that age where they're going to be looking at colleges. What advice would you give to your kids in reference to higher education?
Yeah, I think that I would definitely encourage them to go to Rutgers. And I think that there's some states, like I know New York has the Excelsior scholarship. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amani, the governor is trying to make it free here, college here, or at least at Rutgers, but it'll be a lower price. Like I would definitely encourage them to try to go to Rutgers and be closer to home. Maybe they can still live at home, but to definitely pay off the debt. I'm gonna say, hey, look, see, your dad still got the 20K right here. So try to get rid of it as soon as possible. I would definitely try to put them in that direction. We'll see what they say, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead, Amani.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was actually just at my friend's baby shower. Yes, not baby shower, the 1-year-old birthday. Their baby just turned 1, and we were sitting there talking about like, yeah, college is so expensive now. Like by the time she gets there, if we're going the way we're going, like they're gonna have to basically take out a second mortgage, get a second house. That's the type of money they're gonna have to pay on their mortgage. So it's pretty wild. I don't know what happened to my camera, but I'll fix it in a second.
Okay. That was interesting. It said internal temp. It said internal temp too high.
I was going too hard. Sorry.
That 1-year-old is going to have to get a job right now to pay for their college tuition.
Right.
No, I think one of the problems too is that there's no accountability on the universities, right? Like there seems to be no limit as to how high they can increase the tuition. And that's the other thing. Like even if they did cancel all student loan debt, right? You still have the problem that the colleges continue to increase the tuition. Like even some of the state universities are expensive to attend now. Like look at UMass, University of Massachusetts. It's ridiculous how much it costs to go to a state school, even at the in-state tuition price. So I think that's another thing. The US government has not made any type of statement or rule for these universities to stop them from increasing the tuition to such astronomical rates. Like this is ridiculous if it continues to go on. Like when I left BU, they were charging kids over $70,000 a year to go to Boston University. That's not even Ivy League.
Yeah.
So at that
crazy.
point, at that point, BU is more expensive than Harvard. But again, there seems to be no law or rule in place to hold these colleges accountable. I think that's a big part of the problem.
Not only price controls would make sense in this predicament, but also I'm looking here, Howard, Yale, Stanford, and Princeton increased in value from 127.24 billion to 171 billion. Endowments, they have huge amounts of cash that they're sitting on, that I heard an idea to start taxing a certain percentage of those endowments, and maybe they can use that to decrease the cost of tuition. But they have so much money that they're just storing up for what? They're hoarding wealth, they're hoarding economic power, and they're hoarding it from the rest of us, the 99%.
And the interesting thing about Howard is that, like, actually the government is supposed to be funding Howard in full. So that's also my other problem I have so many with Biden not delivering on his HBCU promise. In HBCU charters, either state governments or the federal government is supposed to be supplying them with money in order to keep things open. So really their tuition should be lower. But oftentimes, and it doesn't matter what president, because even under Obama, actually, like, they were not getting the funding that they were supposed to be getting. Each time they don't fund them the way it's supposed to be funded according to HBCU charters. So it's so nasty to me what Biden has done with his promises versus what he's actually delivered.
And I think people need to understand the effect on the economy, like not canceling student loan debt. Like right now, like, I don't know if people realize this, but it is very difficult for people to buy a single family home, at least in my state, in Massachusetts. It is very difficult right now. Some of the homes that were available, they've been bought up by corporations. They've been bought up by companies like BlackRock. And then they flip the houses and then they increase the price even more. So a lot of these kids that are graduating from college, whether they have a master's or PhD, like, they're living in cramped apartments and they have roommates because they can't come up with the down payment to buy a house. And part of that is because they do have to pay so much in student loan debt. Plus, to go along with that, we have inflation as well. But the thing is, if they were to cancel all of student loan debt, then more people would come up with that down payment and be able to buy a home. But the housing market right now is terrible. And part of that is because of student loan debt, I think.
Yeah.
I'll go to you, Collin. Yeah.
Like, I was visiting my dad last summer and he was like, "You're in your 40s, why don't you have a house yet?" and it's the idea of like, I'm in debt, Dad, I'm still in debt. And I thought about once upon a time, to go for a PhD, and I'm like, no, I don't want to accrue any more debt if necessary. And plus, in a way, it doesn't make sense for me to go into that much debt now at my age with a PhD program. I just don't see the worth in it. But yeah, it's the idea of like, I would love to be able to buy a house, but I can't right now because and like, I was actually speaking to my cousin who lives in Atlanta like last weekend. He bought a house like all over a year ago, but he told me he's broke right now, like trying to fix up the house. And like, it's not a fixer upper, but like, when you buy a house and after you buy a house, things start going wrong, and things started going wrong on top of renovations. And right now he's broke and he's still in debt, still in loan debt. So it's not like he's has the money saved up to be able to do the necessary to arrange the house in a way that he wants to. He is kind of squashed right now between the student debt that he has and then any extra debt he has on top of now paying his mortgage. So so it's, even for people who are kind of making or seemingly making it or having the American dream, quote unquote, it's still difficult. Because in like, of student debt still kind of being a chain around their neck. And my cousin's, again, another one of those who's like in six figures in debt. So you have to imagine if he didn't have that, how much more he would be able to do the investments that he wants to, do the renovations in his home that he wants to, being able to start a family sooner if he wanted to, and he can't do that right now.
Yeah, I
So
was just thinking about that too. Imagine if Amani, you had that 550K to start your own firm, or to start a business. Same for you, Sabby, to invest into your independent media. If you had all that money that you owed right now, for me, the 20K, I have ideas, entrepreneur ideas that I wanted to invest in. And that's economic power that they're taking away from us, the 99%, and they're just sucking it up. The 1% is just sucking it up through BlackRock and other big firms and other ways. It's crazy.
That'd be a cute amount of money to put in a nice political PAC. I'll tell you that right now. That would have been that'd have been cute, actually.
Yep.
This is a good point here from Janice. Thank you so much, Janice. Most corporations demanding bachelor's or above for entry level are just placing the cost of training onto the applicants. And this is another good point, because I remember like my parents talking about like their first like entry level job. They were trained. They were trained how to do the job. My parents did not have a bachelor's degree, but they were trained how to do what they needed to do. What I have noticed, especially from some of my former students, they'll come back after they start their first job and they're like, man, Sabrina, it's rough. Nobody's teaching me how to do anything. They just brought me in and told me, figure it out. He's like, what was it all for? He said, I spent all this time in school. And he's like, I get there and like, I don't know where to start. And I said, welcome to the new job market where they kind of want you to train yourself.
yeah.
And that's becoming more common. Thanks for pointing that out, Janice.
That's an interesting point. I wonder, as progressives, I think about how we try to present progressive policy. Like even Andrew Yang with his UBI, introducing that to the ether. Shama Sawant with the fight for 15, and now turning into the fight for 25 with Workers Strike Back. I look at Denmark, who they pay their students to go to college.
Yep.
So right now, the most extreme left is Bernie Sanders saying, oh, we need to forgive all student loan debt. And I'm thinking like, let's go one step further. Let's not only make college tuition free, but pay a stipend to students. And this would encourage students even more. I saw at least 2 people in the chat who said they had to drop out of college because they couldn't pay for college.
Yeah.
I saw, I think I saw somebody personally in my freshman year of college. People that I knew were there my freshman year were not there moving forward the second year because of the costs. How much more productive could they have been in society if they were able to complete their education? So I'm saying, I don't know what the catchy phrase is, but make college free and stipend. That's what I'm pushing for.
And there are some schools in the US that do this, but there's strings attached. Like, for example, West Point does that, but you're also joining the military. Like, you're joining the Army, and you shouldn't have to like be a part of the military industrial complex just to get a stipend to go to school. Like, it's just, it's actually ridiculous when you think about it.
My program at Lesley, it was a teacher residency program, which is rare to do. But essentially the program basically was I was teaching at the school that I was working at, Sabby. You would know the school if I told you, full time, while I was taking classes full time at the same time. So it was a year intensive program. But because I was a student of color, I got a scholarship to go. Plus, they were paying me as an intern, which they don't normally do. But they were like, "We want you here, so we're willing to give you money in order for you to go to school." So I still had to take out loans, but I didn't have to take out as much compared to if I was doing a part-time 2-year program that many teachers would have to do if they're working full-time. So I ended up getting my master's degree quickly and having less to pay back in loans. I still had to take out loans, but not nearly as much as I would have had to. But it makes me kind of wonder, why are there not any more programs in education like this, where, especially as you were saying, Case, yeah, I learned a lot, just as far as in the books or whatever, but especially with teaching, you learn I'm very much a doer anyway. You learn teaching on the ground, actually implementing some of the policies and the implementing some of the theory that you're learning. Like, you have to do them in the classroom. So it's giving you that experience in terms of you while you're learning in your classes at the same time. And it just makes, and it was less money. And so, like, it's kind of like, why are there not more programs like this for teachers? So that they're able to get the degree that they need in order to get these jobs, but they're not paying an arm and a leg or taking out as much loans in order for them to get the jobs or the well-paying jobs relatively in the field, just in the name of advancing themselves.
All good points. All good points. So before we wrap up, I want to hear from each one of you. What advice would you give to a high school, let's say junior, because people usually start looking junior year. What advice would you give to a high school junior who's trying to decide whether or not they're going to attend college, and let's say they would have to rely on financial aid? Let's start with you, Amani.
I would say that it depends on what your other options are. So, I mean, if you're a junior and let's say you want to go to school and you want to get, a business degree, you want to get your MBA, but your family already, there's my camera again, and your family owns a business, right? And you just want to go into the family business. I would say for you, it's not actually worth it because for you actually, like, you're going to take on all that debt, but there's something that's already set for you that you'll likely get training. You'll likely, you're going to move up. You're going to own it one day. Like, it's not worth it for you because all of that opportunity is there. But if you are not in that position and, you kind of, in order to really substantially change your earning potential or, just being able to survive, frankly, under capitalism and you kind of got to go to college, I would say definitely 100% do it. But I would say don't be safe about it. Like, if you're going to do it, go all out. Go to the school that's ranked the highest that you can, that has the biggest name that you can, that you think you will fit most in socially. And so you can make your connections, that you feel like the professors there are top notch, that you want to learn from. If you're going to do it, like, go all out and get as much as you possibly can. And then create a very serious plan as far as your student loans. One of the places I fumbled was I always knew I wanted to go into public service. Like, after school, I never had the dream to go work at a law firm, for example. I knew I wanted to actually work for government afterwards. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to take on as much loans as possible. I only have to pay back for 10 years and whatever they get back, they get back. But then life, knocked on the door and some things changed. So I would say just make sure you have different strategies in place for, working to pay that off. And then I would also say, make sure when it comes time for you to vote, make sure you're voting for people who have your interests in mind and make them deliver. Don't just say, when they do the little trick that Biden does, which is, Republicans are the ones taking this from you. I'm doing my best. Call BS and don't vote for it. So that's my 2 cents there.
Well said. All right, Case, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I'm in IT and I currently work with somebody who's at my same job, making this pretty much around the same amount of money. And he just went to trade school and he doesn't have all the college debt. So it depends on what occupation you're going into. So if you want to become a doctor, then I agree with Armani, try to find the best school to go to for your profession. But if you have a family business and maybe just take some business classes and then, work with your family on that. And then, I had one more point. My last point is there are a lot of community college and the bigger colleges that they have a synergistic program where you could go to a community college for 2 years, which is a lot less expensive. And then from there, you can go to one of the more affluent colleges or one of the bigger colleges. And so you don't have to pay as much or go into as much debt because you're going to a community college that might cost you $10,000 a year versus $60,000 a year. So that's my 2 cents there.
Awesome. And Collin?
This is hard for me because I think it depends on the field that you want to go into. But I think for me, I would say general rule of thumb, if you're occupation requires you to have a license in order to do that job. So that would be like education, law, medicine, for example. Really consider what options you have in order to ensure that if you're looking to go in those professions, then really do your research and ensure that you can get as much scholarship or grant money as possible if you are looking to go into those fields in particular. Because also keep in mind, as I said, for many of these majors, a lot of these licenses, like the bar, whatever, you have to pay for yourself. So you have to account for that as part of your cost in order to go to college. I will also say, just generally, you don't have to go out of college right out of high school. Take a gap year and work, and like, I think for me, because I was older, like I was 19 by the time I graduated high school, I was like, I can't wait. I need to go to college right now. But like, and that to me was kind of stupid. But like, but take a gap year. There's nothing that says that you have to go to college right away. Take the time, work. You can probably maybe able to do some courses online or read up on, on the subject matter that you are thinking of. But you don't have to feel like immediately once you graduate high school that you have to go to college. You can stay home and work while you think for yourself, or at minimum to be able to save some money, and I know you've said this, Sabby, and I agree that if you have the money and the means to do so, go abroad. I think especially as Black people, I don't think we talk about going abroad enough. And I think we can make that a consideration for folks, especially if you have the means to and you're looking to get that degree, look into that as a consideration. And then I'll also say, like, when you do have colleges that you're really interested in and they give you your financial aid package, call them and see if they're able to give you more. If, as you said, if they want you, then they should really do everything in their power to ensure that they can have you, especially if you're a good student. So really look at, what colleges are offering and kind of think about, does this make sense in light of my career if I can justify having to pay? If I had to pay student loans, would this be a justification for me to go into that field? For some, it might. Others, it might not be. So I think just really do your homework and really make sure that if you are going to go to college, then you can justify taking that cost in order for you to get that career that you want.
Well said. What would I add to this? I guess always have a plan B. Always have a backup plan. I know people that applied to only one school and only wanted to go to that one school and didn't get in. And they were like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? So like always have a backup plan. And then also, to add on to alternative paths, there's other options in reference to universities. Like if you're trying to go into like the tech field, there are other companies like General Assembly where you can just go straight into the courses that you need to become a computer programmer, for example. And you don't have to have those other 2 years where you have to take those core requirement courses. Look into things like that. It is cheaper. They also give out scholarships and financial aid, but it is field specific. Like it's more for people going into like tech industry, for example. But then also, I think we need to, change the way that we think about going to a university that is a traditional 4-year university. I think that oftentimes we think that we're supposed to go there full time. Not necessarily. You can work full time and go to college part time. These are just other alternatives. Yes, it may not be your idea of the college experience, but that is just to put that out there so that you understand there are other options. There's other ways that you can do this. May not be as fun for you, especially socially, but there are other things that you can do. And in reference to room and board, if you can stay at home and go to school, try to stay at home and just commute.
Or stay in state.
Right. Or stay in state. Stay in state. All right, guys. Thank all of you so much for coming on. Before you go, really quick, where can everybody find you? We'll circle back to you, Amani.
You can find me on all social media at Imani, my first name, Oakley, my last name, NJ, like New Jersey, 10. So at Imani Oakley, NJ10, all social media. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. Sorry about all the camera issues, but we still got the information we needed. So thank you. Thank you for the chat and everybody that showed up.
Awesome. Case.
Hey, much love to everybody. Thank you for having me, Sabby. Great panel, hanging out with Collin and Imani. You can find me at Case Study QB on Twitter. I also have a YouTube channel. And I would just want to say free college tuition and a stipend.
Collin.
You can find me on Twitter at Ogbonna, OGBONNA_Collin. You can also find me my LinkedIn at gettingdnews.network, and you can find me and all my other network colleagues for the INN network as well there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. Those of you in the audience, hang around. We're going to do 2 news stories before I go. But thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.